Hello, I'm here during the lunch rush with Janice, who owns her own food truck.
Best cheesesteaks in town.
Janice traded up to Geico Commercial Auto Insurance for her food truck business. We're here where she needs us most.
They sure are.
We make it so easy for her to save, with customised coverage that grows with her business. Sorry, I just get so emotional talking about saving folks money.
Not this onion I'm chopping?
It's just so beautiful. Oh yeah, no, it's the onion.
Get a commercial auto insurance quote today at geico.com and see how much you could save. It feels good to Geico.
So here we go with weight loss medications. What these medications can do and what they can't do, who should take it, who should not take it, and a crazy fun fact about a Gila monster.
Yay Networks.
A quick note before we dive into today's podcast. If you like what you hear, I would love for you to subscribe to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, wherever you download your podcast. It would also be incredible if you take a minute to rate and review this podcast. Those things do matter and they really help us. I'm Molly Kimball. Welcome to Fueled, a wellness and nutrition podcast. I'm a registered dietitian and nutrition journalist with a passion to help people live their strongest, healthiest life possible. In my weekly TV segments and columns, there's a limited amount of time and space to cover everything, but there's so much more to share. This podcast is my opportunity to dive deeper into the topics you want to know about. All right, y'all, I am here with one of my favorite people, friend, colleague, partner in crime, Dr. Robin Bone. She's an OB-GYN with Ochsner Health. We're talking about weight loss medications, and we've talked about that just briefly on this podcast before. And she and I are taking a deeper dive. This is something that, even as Dr. Bone says, that, 5 years ago, she wasn't familiar with these, or even we'll be talking about a lot about the history and how these drugs were developed, which is just absolutely fascinating. The backstory on how these even came from the lab to the market and how researchers found these. It's just, to us, it's fascinating. I think y'all find it interesting. But even a couple of years ago, it wasn't something that was really on her radar. But for the past 18 months, 2 years, patient after patient after patient is asking about it. So she's had to become really well versed in this to say, when is it worth it? When is it not worth it? To help guide that patient when, there may be times that it's something for them to consider, or to maybe show them or guide them with other options. And so that's what we'll be talking about today. What's the deal with these weight loss medications? What do we know about them? What do we not know about them? What are some of the side effects? How did they come to light? How did they come to market? And how to know when this is worth it and when it's not. So with that, welcome, Dr. Bone.
Hey, Molly, thank you so much for having me. And you are exactly right. 2 years ago, I knew very little about Ozempic. And, I laugh because I don't claim at all in practice to be an expert on all of these drugs, but I've sort of had to become an expert because there's not a day that goes by that patients aren't asking me these questions as they walk in the door.
Is it patients who have a significant amount of weight to lose? Is it patients who are I call it vanity pounds, 3-5 pounds?
All across the board. Everybody wants to know, what's the scoop? Is it safe? I would say the majority of patients that are asking have 30, 40, 50 pounds to lose. But people just want to know, what's the real deal?
And the medications that we're going to be talking about, Ozempic is, you and I were talking earlier, there's different names, Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro. Ozempic is sort of like the Coca-Cola. Like here in the South, y'all, if for those of y'all who aren't in the South region listening to it, but in the South, people say, "Oh, do you want a Coke?" Or if they're offering a soft drink, "Do you want a Coke?" And then they'll say, "We have Dr. Pepper, Coke, whatever." Back in the day when people just really offered soft drinks, that doesn't happen quite as much. But Coke, basically, y'all, Coca-Cola is sort of generic for soft drink here. Ozempic has almost become that for weight loss medications.
Exactly.
There's clinics that are doing the weight loss injectables, and people will loosely refer to them as Ozempic clinics, even though they may be injecting other types of medications. Ozempic's sort of the catch-all. So sometimes we may say Ozempic, and we're kind of meaning these collectively.
And patients are very confused. So semaglutide is the umbrella name for Ozempic. So semaglutide, Ozempic is semaglutide, and Wegovy is also semaglutide. Ozempic was marketed and FDA approved for type 2 diabetes. Wegovy was marketed and FDA approved for weight loss.
And so Ozempic came out 2017 specifically for diabetes. And then the same drug company said, hold on, we're seeing all this weight loss. We're going to put this drug under another name, Wegovy, and now that's approved for, is it FDA approved to treat obesity?
Yes.
Wegovy, yes.
That happened in 2021. So between 2017, when Ozempic first came out and they realized, hey, patients are losing a lot of weight on this, they actually did a study of about 2,000 patients, did a big old study, and then they marketed it for weight loss, and they increased the dose a little bit too. So Wegovy does have a higher dose than Ozempic, but that came from that weight loss trial.
And so Ozempic and Wegovy are two that are getting just so much press for it. Mounjaro is another. Eli Lilly manufactures that, and it's a diabetes medication that's also showing significant weight loss. If for those who are on social media, you'll see it all across social media. There's different celebrities that are, Elon Musk, Andy Cohen, they're talking about it. Elon Musk, I saw, that he tweeted that he was taking Wegovy when people were talking about, that he looked like he had leaned out or whatever. There's so many people taking it and they're very open about it. I find, it's one of those things where a lot of times when someone's doing something, they may want it to, they may not want to share. Maybe there's people who are like that, but there's an awful lot of people who are open to share. Like you'll say someone comments on someone's weight and the other person says, oh, I've been doing Ozempic. Mm-hmm. It's very common for people to be open about it.
Well, and I think it's all over social media. So it's almost like it is commonplace, and it works. So that is part of why it's very common in Hollywood. It's being tweeted, it's on Instagram, it's on TikTok. People are seeing it and they're getting results with it.
And when you see someone's results and another friend or person is going to comment on someone, oh, wow, you look fantastic. And then when they hear that they're on it, then that spurs it even more to say, ooh, let me ask my physician as your patients are coming in and talking with you about it. So we talked about there's clinics that are kind of popping up that are specifically doing nothing but injections. Mm-hmm. You were saying that there's a clinic that you guys, you had a familiarity with, and they said, actually, we can't take any more patients.
Yes.
And it's just injections. And we'll talk about this, y'all, too, about, I think what I lament on that is that people are going in for injections and that's all they're getting from a clinic like that. They're not getting education. They're not getting lifestyle counseling. They're not getting a referral to a dietitian or any type of an exercise program. They're literally coming in for an injection and then it's on to the next patient getting an injection. Mm-hmm. So for me, I definitely lament that. We'll probably talk a little bit more about it, but the other thing to be aware of with these is they are effective as long as you are on it. And if you stop taking it, that effectiveness wanes.
In that Wegovy study that came out in 2021, they actually followed those patients. So in a year, patients lost about 15% of their body weight over a year. And if they kept on Wegovy for an additional year, they kept their weight off. But if they stopped taking the Wegovy after a year, most of them, 2/3 of them gained their weight back.
Almost all of it or significant amount of it back?
Significant amount of it back.
And so
So you have to be prepared when you start taking these in your mindset. And if I was counseling a patient, you just have to say, you have to be prepared to stay on these, for life.
And what's the end game? And talk about, well, we're getting ahead of ourselves, but so for one, there's clinics popping up everywhere that are focused just on this and having to staff up and everything because there's just such an influx of patients coming in only for that injection and then out the door onto the next patient to inject. There's also, physicians, it's not uncommon for them to be prescribed like for off-label use. So there's people who talk about that. Like, what does that mean if someone is prescribing it for off-label?
So for off-label with Ozempic and Wegovy, when Ozempic first came out, they saw that there was weight loss. So you could prescribe Ozempic off-label. It wasn't covered by insurance, but you certainly could prescribe it off-label for weight loss. And then the FDA approved Wegovy for that. That's what we're seeing with Mounjaro now. So Mounjaro is now, as of 2020, is FDA approved for diabetes. It is not yet approved for weight loss. It's coming. They're doing studies now, but there are physicians and patients who are getting Mounjaro prescriptions for weight loss
Who are not diabetic.
and that's called off-label.
And
But
so
that's not uncommon in the medicine world.
Right.
We do that.
Right.
You know, it's just not going to be covered by insurance.
also that was, there was a shortage of the Ozempic for people who did have diabetes who were not able to maybe access it for a period of time because the popularity soared so much because people who were getting it off label.
In 2021, right after that study was completed on Wegovy, I read an article where there was 64,000 prescriptions of Ozempic that was written. And in that same year, right after that study got released, Wegovy, there were close to 90,000 prescriptions written for Wegovy. So it's just crazy. So you could see why the drug companies were having such a hard time, because in 1 year they went from 60,000 prescriptions to 150,000 prescriptions almost overnight.
It's mind blowing, and it is one of those types of things where when we look at big changes in how people are approaching weight loss, this is kind of one of those pivotal times these past couple of years with these injectable weight loss medications that have really changed the conversation around weight loss approaches. And so this is, there's been prescription medications in the past that, we think about something like fen-phen. And when you look at how a lot of those weight loss meds in the past worked, they acted on our central nervous system. They raised our heart rate. They increased your risk for cardiovascular issues. There was things that they were acting to rev our metabolism. A lot of people would feel anxiety, anxiousness, tremors, all these things that you would think about it. These drugs, these weight loss drugs, act in a whole different way. And so we'll talk about that as we kind of talk about the history of how these even came to be. But they're not really they're not revving our metabolic rate and helping us burn more calories. They're actually helping to cut our appetite, curb our appetite.
Can I talk a little science for a second?
Yeah.
So, part of the way these drugs work is with insulin and glucagon. And Ozempic is what is called a GLP-1 agonist. And I had to, when I first was looking this up, I was like, what the heck is GLP? I kind of remember that from med school, But what GLP is, it's glucagon-like peptide. And what that is, just so people understand, is it is a hormone or a peptide. And these peptides are made in our intestines. Kind of crazy. So it's a signal.
Right.
So when we eat food, this is kind of the simple way of thinking it. When we eat food and that food gets into our intestines, we have some endocrine cells which release hormones in our intestines. So when the food gets there, these endocrine cells release GLP-1 in our bloodstream, which is a signal that then goes to our pancreas to say, hey guys, food is here, start to release insulin. And what insulin does, and you have to kind of understand insulin and glucagon, and it also says stop releasing glucagon. So when you think about our bloodstream and sugar in our blood, we want to kind of maintain a normal blood sugar. And when we eat food, our blood sugar is going to rise. So if you think about it, we need something to drain the sink. If you think about our bloodstream as a sink. So if the sink is our blood, think of insulin as the drain, right? We want something to drive that sugar somewhere else out of our bloodstream. And so where does that sugar go? It goes into our muscle cells to run. It goes into our liver for storage, and it goes into our fat cells for storage. And glucagon, when we're fasting overnight, and we don't have enough sugar in our bloodstream, we still want to have a normal blood sugar. So glucagon, you can think of as the faucet. So our liver stores sugar in a storage form. And so glucagon helps that liver release that sugar into the bloodstream. So that's the faucet. Okay. So getting back to GLP-1, I think it's just important to kind of understand what's happening in our bodies. So GLP-1, the way that works is it signals the pancreas to release insulin. It also signals the pancreas to not make glucagon. But it also does some other kind of two other really cool things. One is it delays gastric emptying. So it makes you feel full so much faster. And so that's what patients are kind of describing, like, oh, I used to eat a Big Mac and French fries, and now I eat 3 French fries and 2 bites, and I'm full. So that's one of the ways it works.
So that delayed gastric emptying basically means it stays in your stomach a little bit longer. It slows that down.
It slows it down. It slows it down. But the thing that we don't know exactly how it works or why it works, and this is what has all the scientists baffled, and, time is going to tell more information as it comes, but it also decreases our appetite in the brain.
Right.
So that GLP-1 also, the fourth way it works is it goes to the brain and it actually stimulates or decreases our appetite by stimulating our central nervous system.
And that's what a lot of people have referred to it as. What they say is what might feel like a compulsion to eat. People are referring to it as food noise. And that food noise is that obsession or that compulsion. And you can't get XYZ out of your brain. If you know something's in the pantry or whatever it is, like there's just like, it is something that feels like it's driving us, or that compulsion to eat. That food noise is dampened really significantly with these medications. So when someone's taking them, that obsession or that feeling consumed, or I always kind of think of it like you're feeling underwater, like you don't feel in control of it. It's in control of you. That dials back a lot for people, but it's only while they're taking it. Yeah. And just like we said, when they stop taking it, that food noise, people are saying, is returning for them. So it does kind of go back to there's all these different ways that we're seeing. As Dr. Bone said, these are the ways that we know loosely how it works, but then there's a lot of things that are still big question marks. Like, we're identifying that it helps to reduce the food noise, but how? Like, what are the mechanisms that it's actually sending that signal to our brain? So there's still a lot of questions about just how it works, but there's no question that it works for weight loss.
People are also saying that they don't want to drink anymore. So that at home, they'd want to pour that glass of wine, that they just don't have those cravings. They don't have the cravings for food. They don't have the cravings for alcohol. So it's really interesting, and we just aren't quite sure why that is.
Also, when you think about the reasons that people do have a lot of those compulsions to eat, or the fill in the blank food or whatever that's in the pantry that people can't get out of their head, a lot of times those are those carby foods, the carb, salt, and fat. It's the chips, it's the cookies, it's cookie dough. And those really cause that kind of, in some people, almost like a euphoria. In some people, it can be, it's a scale. Some people respond really strongly to those foods, but for almost everyone, there's some sort of a dopamine release. It's affecting our stress levels, our feel-good kind of chemicals that are floating through our bodies. And people eat those foods to numb out, to unwind for the day. So it's interesting to me that there's also a lesser desire to drink, because to drink alcohol, it's people are turning to those things for the same thing, to numb out, to unwind, to like release that, we think of it as like those carbs and that serotonin release. And it's kind of like it's like that people experience when they have it, but it's short lived, And so the desire for alcohol is very similar to that. So it's interesting and that has nothing to do with hunger.
Right.
It has to do with what else is happening in our brains when we eat. What pathways is that food or drink lighting up?
Yep. And that's what we need to figure out over time.
Yeah.
Is that signal.
So when you look at drug development over time, and you look at, these major pharmaceutical companies, and they're developing these different types of medications, a lot of times it's going to be very strategic, or it's going to be, there's a very specific plan. But in this case, this has been a really interesting story. It started like back in the 70s, y'all. And so there's an interesting article in the New York Times, and I'll link to it in our show notes. But this was something that I learned. I had no idea of any of this stuff. But there was a couple of researchers who, let's see, I'm looking at our notes here. So this was back in the 70s. There was an endocrinologist who was starting his own lab in Massachusetts, at Massachusetts General Hospital. And he was looking for a research project, and he started studying diabetes. And he was looking at this, that, there's issues with giving just insulin injections. And so he was looking at what are other hormones that can play a role in managing diabetes. And so he started to study the genes that trigger our cells to make glucagon. So what Dr. Bone was just talking about with glucagon. And as he was looking to see what produces glucagon, what makes our body produce glucagon, that's when he discovered that GLP-1. So that was discovered back in the 70s.
That it even existed.
Right. I mean, 50 years ago it was discovered. And then it seemed like over time, so he saw, okay, this GLP-1, it helps to regulate blood sugar levels. It's only acting on the insulin producing cells of the pancreas, and it's only acting when glucose levels raise too high. So there was, the problem though was that if you injected just that GLP-1, it like came and went very quickly. Like just injecting someone with it, it was
gone in minutes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So then it was, so we're looking again back in the 70s, and then researchers worked on this for years. There's a researcher, I'm looking at Dr. Daniel Drucker, who had worked on it for years. He consults for Novo Nordisk and other companies. But I liked what he said in the interview. He said that it was really lonely. And he said he had applied to give different presentations at conferences, like endocrine type conferences. And they would be like, yeah, sure. And they'd put him at the very end of the last day of the
like this drug's going nowhere.
Right. Yeah. Or like GLP-1, this guy won't stop talking about it. Like what's even, like he was like, everyone had left for the airport. People were taking down the exhibits. And so like literally for decades, no one's listening. Mm-hmm. And so now, the GLP-1 that everyone can't stop talking about, and if they're talking about Ozempic or Wegovy, they don't realize it, but it's tied to that. For literally the 80s and 90s, he had essentially deaf ears or no ears that were listening to him. And so it wasn't until about 1990 that this was really interesting to me. Did you read this?
This is a crazy story.
This is a lizard.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lizard called the Gila monster or Gila monster.
Gila monster.
I mean, that sounds like it's something out of like a makeup story.
Yeah. It's like out of Jurassic Park for sure.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay. So do you want to tell this part of the story or do you want me to?
Well, there was a Gila, correct me if I'm wrong, because I know you have the story in front of you, but I'm going by my memory. So there's a Gila monster. And so what they found.
Sounds like we're like totally making this up. I know. But the Gila monster is a venomous lizard.
Yes. And in the venom of the lizard, in the saliva, they actually found GLP-1.
That lasted longer.
And yes. And not only did they find GLP-1, but its half-life, meaning the time that it breaks down in scientific terms, was much longer than those couple of minutes. So they were like, wow, now this is the key, because the whole problem over the last 10 years was that they found this GLP-1, but as quick as they injected it, you'd have to have somebody with an infusion of GLP-1 with an IV drip going all the time, because in 2 minutes it was going to be gone. So they saw this saliva of this lizard and they realized
the Gila monster.
They realized that the GLP-1 variant lasted longer. So they patented it and they were onto something, and that's where it started rolling.
So what's interesting is the researcher who was researching the Gila monster, he was interested in this lizard because it somehow, like, even when it was going like really long periods without having anything to eat, its glucose levels, its blood sugar levels were still stable, which is why he was even drawn to study this particular lizard in the first place. He was a researcher with the VA, the Veterans Affairs Medical Center in the Bronx. They didn't want to patent the hormone, so then he patented it himself. Now they're like, oh man, And so he patented it. He licensed it to a pharmaceutical company. They started testing it as a diabetes drug that went on the market as Byetta in the early 2000s.
Yep. So that was in 2005. And that was the start of it. So they
that had to be injected twice a day though, right?
Yes. So it started off as a twice daily medication. So then if you kind of fast forward 5 years later, that's when liraglutide came out, which is Victoza. And that was finally the first daily injectable GLP-1 medication that was out. And it was FDA approved for diabetes at that time.
And so part of what was through there was, researchers, chemists were then having to look to see how do we stabilize that GLP-1? How do we make the lizard saliva GLP-1 last even longer, to find something that is going to be more durable, lasting long enough so that you didn't have to do twice a day injections. And like you said, it was daily injections with Victoza. And then now the Ozempic is
once a week.
Once a week.
Mm-hmm.
And the Wegovy is also
once a week.
Once a week. And so it had sort of, let's see.
And it was actually in the Victoza group, that's when they started seeing all this weight loss in these diabetic patients. So that's when they kind of hooked onto that and then got FDA approval for weight loss. And that was something called Saxenda. And patients that came out in 2014. So that was really the start. 2010 was Victoza, liraglutide. 2014, liraglutide got reapproved for weight loss. And then in 2017 was Ozempic, the once a week injection for diabetes. And then 2021 was Wegovy, the same drug as Ozempic, but geared for FDA approved for weight loss.
And then that's when the frenzy started.
The
social media frenzy, the conversations at the grocery store frenzy, where people are hearing it, they're asking, they're seeing these physical changes in people, and then they're asking, hey, what did you do? What did you try? What's helped you reach this? And, I found myself wondering that about, like, I'll wonder, that person had such a rapid transformation. I wonder if they were taking Ozempic or Wegovy or something and maybe aren't forthcoming. There's a few that are coming to mind that are men and women who striking, almost unrecognizable. And when they say, yeah, I just been like really watching my protein and hitting the gym, I'm like, really? Like, cause it's really rapid. So let's talk about, that's kind of the history of it. So yeah, this, the Gila monster, I think it would be actually really cool too, if that Gila monster was maybe like the logo for some of these. Like, we'll have to see like what it even looks like, but I think it could be like, it should be like a mascot.
Yes, for sure.
For all of these in general. So let's talk about, we talked a bit about, or I guess a lot about, yes, these work. There's no question that in those different mechanisms of action, they work. They work to help keep glucose levels, insulin levels stable. They work to decrease our hunger cues, decrease that drive for food, decrease that food noise. And it's because that is why people are losing weight. They're simply not eating the volume. It has nothing to do with it's revving their metabolism or anything like that. One of the things that I've seen with people who I know are taking it, the way that it's affecting their relationship with food or restaurants, people who are like very like fun loving people and they always want to try the latest place, it changes all of that, I mean, in a way that seems like there's sometimes an incredible amount of like feeling nauseous, feeling very queasy. And so when we feel that way, we don't have much of an appetite. And so we're not eating. But who wants to feel that way on the regular? What are some of the other side effects that are the big heavy hitters?
Yeah. So I would say nausea is the number one side effect. 30 to 40% of patients, and some people even say 45% of patients that take it get nauseated. Now, we'll say, the way these medications are prescribed, you start with a very low dose and you have to work your way up. And it might take 4 months to actually get to a maximal dose. And it seems that every time your dose is increased, you have that nausea sort of return. So just when you kind of get used to that dose for 1 month, the dose increases and then that wave of nausea comes back. So the longer that you're on it, the nausea does tend to subside, but in those first 4 to 6 months, the nausea is very pronounced. I mean, that is the number one side effect. And it is kind of funny, like you said, that is part of kind of how it's not really all how it works, but boy, that also is a deterrent, right? Because you're not really wanting to eat because you're extremely nauseated. The other side effect is you get some other GI disturbances like diarrhea and constipation. And that I would say that's number 2 and 3. Diarrhea is a little bit more common than constipation, but again, that is also dose related and it usually seems to worsen every time the dose level
And then
goes
levels
up,
out for
and
a
then it
bit.
levels out. Yeah, yeah.
So those are things that someone may say, you know what, I'll take that. I'll roll the dice if those are the risk. But there's more risk.
Yeah, there are. And so a lot of people, some people can tolerate it. And then there are some patients who are like, I cannot tolerate this nausea. And they actually stop taking it for the nausea. So that's transient. It comes and goes. There's a few other less common side effects that I'll just mention. I mean, some of them are kind of weird, like runny nose. Why would you have that? But that is listed. Headaches, abdominal pain. It does increase your heart rate by about 10 points. And so sometimes some people will notice some exercise intolerance for people who are exercising, but those are all minor. The big red flags that I tell patients are pancreatitis. So we are seeing an increased risk of pancreatitis, and that's an inflammation of the pancreas. It can cause severe nausea and vomiting. So if your nausea and vomiting is severe, you really should mention that to your doctor and get that checked. And you're on these medications and get that checked out. Gallstones is also another common thing, but you do see that in rapid weight loss. So you just have to be aware and be mindful of gallbladder symptoms. Another big thing that it does, I told you, it delays gastric emptying, and that is a medical term called gastroparesis. So it slows down the gut. And the one big thing to know, if you're having a surgery that's coming up, a lot of times doctors in the anesthesia department will want you off of these medications for at least a week before surgery because it slows that gastric emptying and food just sits in your stomach, and that puts you at more at risk for vomiting and aspiration when you're intubated. So, if you're having surgery, that's a big thing. But gastroparesis can cause some issues because food is just not moving through your GI tract very well. So those are all related. Pancreatitis, gallstones, gastroparesis. And then another thing is thyroid cancer. So I tell patients, proceed with caution, especially if you have a personal history of thyroid cancer or a family history of thyroid cancer. These drugs have been found to cause cancer in rodents, thyroid cancer, especially something called medullary thyroid cancer in rodents. It is not necessarily translated over into human studies. But again, this drug is in the realm of longevity of drugs is fairly new and short-lived. So we don't know what we don't know. And so that will pan out over time on whether that thyroid cancer risk is real or not. But it's in animal studies. So we just have to extrapolate. And I just say proceed with caution. And it is a real kind of black box warning that says if you have thyroid cancer or a family history, you should not take it.
I mean, the medications are so new. They're so new. And when you think at longest, it's been, Ozempic since 2017, others, 2021 or sooner, more recent, that's really, really a short window to see long-term effects. So what we're talking about so far is what we know, but then we said earlier, if these medications are going to continue to be effective, you must continue to be on them. And if you're saying, okay, I'm going to take this, I'm going to take it to lose weight, those same, the ways and the methods in that it is helping you curb that appetite, eat less, achieve that lower weight. You heard Dr. Bone say it earlier, when they come off the medication, 2/3 of the patients are regaining all or significant portion of that weight. So if you're saying, okay, I'm going to take this forever, yet we don't know what do those side effects look like for someone who's on it 5 years, 10 years and longer. Mm-hmm. I mean, there hasn't been a human on it for 10 years or longer.
Correct. Correct.
And so I think that's something to be, there's a giant question mark there. So any other big side effects we want to talk about?
The main thing that I've been telling patients about, which is not in the studies, but there are some people some physicians that I respect that are doing some longevity studies, and they are using Ozempic and Wegovy for weight loss, especially in patients who have a lot of weight to lose. But it's interesting, they are actually doing, and in that Wegovy study, it was 2,000 patients, and 100 plus.
Tell us about the Wegovy study, the one that also showed the reduction in heart disease risk.
Yeah. So in that Wegovy study, there was a 20% reduction in heart attacks and strokes. So that's a good plus.
Right.
But what they also found, and it was in about 140 patients. So you can imagine how they do these studies is they have different areas of the country that recruit patients to be in the study, and they're monitored in different areas of the country. Well, this one particular group, they were actually doing DEXA scans. So what that is they were measuring, they were dividing up, your weight into fat mass, bone mass, and muscle mass. And so what they found in the patients, normally when you lose weight, typically when you lose 4 pounds, you might lose 3 pounds of fat and 1 pound of muscle. Some muscle kind of just gets dragged along with it. But what they found in those patients who were on the Wegovy is for every 1.6 pounds of fat they were losing 1 pound of muscle. So instead of it being 3 to 1, it was almost 1.5, to 1. So patients were losing more muscle.
A lot more muscle.
A lot more muscle.
So for the fat mass they're losing, it's not quite 1-to-1, but close to 1-to-1 muscle to fat. Whereas in a normal environment without the medications, it might be a 3-to-1 for every 3 pounds fat, 1 pound muscle. So just restate it. So that's a really big thing. So the problem with this is muscle is what we call like very metabolically active. Muscle is what burns so many calories. You want a higher metabolism, build more muscle. It's what helps support us. It's what's helping to, as we age, it's helping us age more healthfully. It's helping us have better balance. There's all these benefits to muscle, even besides metabolism and aesthetic appearances and stuff. There's a lot of, and it's hard. It's very hard to build muscle mass. We have to put a lot of work into it. There's resistance training, a lot of it's genes, but then there's a lot of we have to make that conscious effort to maintain and build that muscle. And so when we're taking a drug that can be so quick to reduce that valuable muscle mass, that's a shame.
Yeah, that is the big red flag. So there is a longevity guy that I really like. His name is Peter Attia. He's a physician, and he actually he uses these drugs, but he makes every patient do a DEXA. And since
which shows body composition.
Which shows that body composition. And he's finding this exact same thing. And so that is his big concern. And I know for even my own self, as I'm in my mid-50s now, I'm doing everything I can to try to increase muscle, because I know for longevity that is, that's going to keep me healthy,
So if someone were considering these weight loss medications, whether it's Ozempic, Wegovy, or Mounjaro, or any of these, something to keep in mind is, okay, we're likely going to be at a higher risk of losing that muscle mass. So we said earlier, there's a lot of clinics kind of popping up that are just injection next, without that education. So it's really important to say, okay, what are we going to do to prevent that muscle loss? So make sure, even if you're not a big exercise person, if you found any type of movement you like that has some sort of resistant component to it, it could be using your own body weight. It could be doing, there's anything that's adding, I would say we can do walking, we could do cycling, but ideally something that's using a level of resistance. Again, your own body weight, bands, hand weights, going to a gym, doing a class, whatever it is that you're going to find that you like to do, but doing something to maintain and ideally help to build muscle mass. And then making sure that as your appetite is lessened, for the calories that you are consuming, making sure that you're keeping them protein-rich calories.
Absolutely. And that's the message that I'm telling my patients is that, if you're going to take these drugs, make sure you are getting 100 grams of protein a day. And that's hard to do, especially as your appetite is decreased. So, the thoughts of why these patients are losing so much muscle is really because they're just not eating so much anymore. Their appetite is decreased. So make sure that you're eating protein-rich foods, and then, do things to build muscle.
Right.
Lift some weights.
And it's not just going to happen. Like, we have to be conscious in that. If someone says, okay, when is it worth it? I'm looking at my risk benefits here. When's it worth it? When's it not worth it?
If you have 30, 40, 50 pounds to lose, where that is a health risk, if you are kind of teetering with pre-diabetes, if you have some hypertension, if you have a good amount of weight to lose, it may be worth it to take these medications.
Especially if you have other factors that are putting your health at risk.
Absolutely. I mean, it's always better to do it on your own and consult a nutritionist. I'm not just saying that because Molly's sitting right here. You know, this is what I tell my patients. But the fact of the matter is these drugs work.
I feel like even 30 pounds, the person who has 30 pounds to lose is like, easy for you to say. But the person who has 30 pounds to lose, while they, yes, will undoubtedly be healthier with that 30 pounds off, 30 pounds is still, I don't know. I feel like that's still not so huge for, I feel like, I don't know. I feel like if someone's got, 80, 100 or more, not that 30 pounds is nothing, but how much is that 30 pounds on most people? Now, if you've got someone who's like 5'1", 30 pounds is going to be a big change. But if you've got someone who's, 5'10", the man who's 6 feet tall, a 30-pound drop, yes, 100% losing 30 pounds is going to improve someone's health. But is it going to improve it enough to stay on that medication for the rest of your life? I don't know. I feel like if this were like a relative of mine, who was asking and then, really like I could just be like super like honest, I would say 30, 40, I don't even know about that, but maybe if I'm starting to see, okay, 60, 80, 100 pounds or more, maybe
sure.
so. And then also definitely if we're looking at diabetes, pre-diabetes, if there's, cardiovascular issues, there's hypertension, there's a lot of things there that if they're losing that weight and it's going to also improve those markers, then yes, so I think
this is not for the person who has 10 or 15, 20 pounds to lose that just wants to look good in a bikini. That is not who this is for, because if you lose 10 pounds, that's going to be 10 pounds and half of that, or at least a third of that, will be muscle.
Right.
And what is the long-term repercussions of that? And are you ever going to build that muscle back?
And are you going to take this forever? And if you're not, then that all the food noise, as we said, is more likely to come back. What about, I didn't see this so specifically in side effects, but have you seen where it's almost like an agitation or an anxiety increase with people on it?
I haven't seen that.
We have friends who have shared that they're on it. And that's something that we've noticed. Now, it could just be where those people are in their life and it's unrelated to the medication. But we've thought, I wonder if that's related to, and it's been people who, from our perspective, probably didn't need to take it, kind of the vanity extra few pounds, like they looked great anyway, but in their minds, we're always harder on ourselves than what other people are to us. And so in their minds, they felt like the kind of risk benefit was worth it. But in a few of those, we've seen, it feels like a little bit of a level of agitation that has increased. And I've wondered if it was.
I wonder if it's because they're nauseated.
Or just hungry. Yeah, right. Nauseated, right.
They're just not feeling good.
Right. Big food lovers and now nothing looks good to them and they're just a little crabby. That whole passion is out the window there for food. So it's, you hear us even as we're having this conversation for this, episode that y'all are listening to, Dr. Bone with the 30, 40, 50 pounds. And I get it. I think so. But then I kind of look at it as even, if I had somebody close to me that said, I need to lose 30 pounds, I'm considering this, I would say, let's really try some other avenues first. So, like Dr. Bone was saying, of course, we're going to say it, try to meet with a dietitian. And if you have that access to a dietitian, if you have diabetes, it's going to be covered by insurance. If you don't have diabetes, still check. A lot of times it's covered still by your insurance. Insurance companies are becoming more generous with coverage for nutrition consults. Or there's, the amount of money that maybe you would be paying for the dietitian consult compared to maybe what you would be paying for prescriptions over time, might even out. Something that I'm a big fan of for sort of that education, and you and I have talked briefly about this before, but the continuous glucose monitor. Mm-hmm. I think this is such a neat thing. It's if you've listened to this podcast before, you've heard me talk about it. There's NutriSense, which has a really great app interface, and they include consults one-on-one with you have your own dedicated dietitian while you're doing that with their continuous glucose monitor. It's about a little over $300 for a month. And all you would really need is a month to kind of have that data. But Abbott, the Abbott pharmaceutical company, they have one called Freestyle Libra. And their Freestyle Libre, you can get a month of sensors, which is 2 sensors. They're 14 days each. And it's not more than $75 from a regular, drugstore. And that's with a physician's prescription, whether you have diabetes or not, though. So it's a glucose monitor. And the reason I went straight to that is if someone says, I think I'm doing everything I can to lose weight, slap one of those on you. And it is so educational on, wow, I was having something like popcorn at night. And I thought that that was a really good low calorie snack. I had someone tell me this. They put that glucose monitor on and it was spiking them up into the red caution area and holding them there through their sleep. And so what that means is when your glucose levels are up and your insulin levels go up, that's all your body's in that fat storage mode when it's high and it's inflammatory and all of this happening at night. So that can be another point of education, and it can be a catalyst for behavior change. So when you see, okay, I have this glucose monitor, and you may just use it for the month of your sensor, your 2 sensors. Once you see how certain foods affect it, and you see how other foods might be much better influence on your body, that's the behavior change that's lasting. So soapbox.
That's one of the reasons, this is my little soapbox too. It's one of the reasons why I think intermittent fasting works so nicely too is, intermittent fasting, the way that works is you have all this sugar that's stored in your liver and as glycogen, it's kind of a fancy word, but overnight as you're sleeping, we talked about how your body wants to maintain a normal blood sugar. And when you're not eating for a certain amount of hours, what it's going to do is use that glycogen that's stored, that's in the liver. And when the glycogen is gone, then the other place that sugar is stored, because we talked about that, like muscle, liver, and fat cells, then it's going to start using the sugar that's stored in your fat cells for energy. And so, but to maintain your blood sugar. And so I am sort of a big proponent of intermittent fasting.
Me
I didn't know I was my whole life because I've kind of done it my whole life and didn't realize I was doing something good. I always thought I was doing something bad when everyone said you had to eat breakfast, and I never did. But I do feel like that is one way to decrease insulin resistance. And between that and watching the high sugar and high carb and foods that you're eating to keep those insulin spikes down so that it doesn't trigger your body to store fat, I definitely think that is a path that is much healthier.
And it's giving ourselves the tools, the resources, things that are helping to set us up for understanding the why and understanding that personalization for ourselves that does lead to that lasting behavior change. Anything can be that quick fix. We were saying that kind of the Ozempic clinics popping up, that's what's now. 5-10 years ago, there was Ideal Protein on like every, chiropractor or physical therapy clinic was doing that. And now, there's injectables. Like there's always something out there that is that quick fix. Right now, these injectable weight loss medications are that. But what can we do that isn't the of the moment trend, but things that are lasting? And like Dr. Bone, I'm a huge fan of intermittent fasting. If you would have asked me a decade ago, I wouldn't have thought so much. But with the research on that, and that can look very different for a lot of people. It can be simply a 12-hour fasting window. It might be a 16-hour fasting window. So if you eat at not eating past, let's just say 8 p.m., and then you eat breakfast the next day at 8 a.m., that's a 12-hour fasting window. Or you may say, I won't eat past 8 p.m., and then I won't eat until maybe 11 a.m. Well, that's a 15-hour fasting window. And so people will extend their fasting window, maybe 12 hours, 14, 16-hour fasting window. And then that fueling window, you still want to keep the foods as nutritious as possible. And that window is going to vary for all, depending on the person. I've had people tell me their fueling window is 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. because they're late out. They're late. They're up a lot later. So everything is shifted back. Some do, it may be, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. and that's it. And so whatever that window is going to vary. But something like intermittent fasting, we both agree, that can be a really effective approach and a lifestyle change. The continuous glucose monitor gives you that data on how your body processes things. And that data is going to drive behavior change.
And just think, not everyone tolerates Ozempic. Not everyone can tolerate these drugs. That's number one. Another thing is not everybody can afford it. I mean, these drugs are expensive. It costs about $1,200 a month if insurance is not paying for it.
So if someone's taking it off label, as we talked earlier,
$1,200 a month. And so that's like $15,000 a year.
That's a lot of sessions with a dietitian.
Yes. And a lot of glucose monitoring.
Right. You could go the full route and do that NutriSense. Treat yourself to the NutriSense.
That's right. And that's why those Ozempic, I call them Ozempic clinics, are popping up, because it's compounded. So it is less expensive. But regardless, it's expensive. And then the question is, the verdict is still out. And it's looking like once you start these drugs, you're going to have to at least maintain, if not necessarily a weekly injection. Do you do a monthly injection? Is this for life? These are answers to questions that we don't know. But I think the counseling should be, if you start these drugs, you have to be of the mindset that you may have to continue them in some way, shape, or form in order to keep that weight loss off.
So lots to think about here. So for people listening, if this is, just hearing this, you may have sort of made your mind up. Okay, I don't think I'm ready to take those risks. I don't think that I'm in the category of it's worth it for me. If you're on the fence, if it's worth it or not, talk with a provider. Talk with a provider that you trust. Talk with, your OB like Dr. Bone. Talk with a registered dietitian like our team of dietitians at Ochsner Fitness Center. Reach out to someone who you trust. And I'll say reach out to someone who's not going to be profiting off of you taking one of these medications. Reach out to someone who's in an objective space, to really get a trusted opinion. If you have been working with a cardiologist for whatever reason, by all means, check with them. Check with people who know you. They know your health. They know your background.
And I will say, in all disclosure, it is so tempting. I have 5 pounds that I would love to lose. And, we're all into the quick fix. And yes, it is a quick fix, but there is a cost for that quick fix. So, personally, my own self, I've choose just to have a little more love handles than I used to have 10 years ago. And I am personally working on trying to increase my own muscle mass and really just to manage my life through lifestyle and diet.
There's a lot here, y'all. We'll link to some very interesting articles. We'll link to some podcasts that we've done before on this. I'll link to the information on the continuous glucose monitors. There's a lot here. So I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me. I love it.
Always grateful to Dr. Robin Bone for sharing her time, her expertise. I also really enjoy how she just breaks things down, and it's like hearing the rundown on science, on the latest data, the research, and her patient experience. It's like hearing that, but also hearing it the same way that like your best friend would tell you. So I love that she's so relatable, just how she conveys the information. So tremendous thank you to her. And I'll include the links that we talked about in the show notes of this episode. Lots of information on this topic, lots to think about, marinate on. So we'll include these resources for you, and let us know what you think. If you're thinking and weighing the pros and cons of this, we always want to hear about it. I am registered dietitian Molly Kimball, and you've been listening to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, the podcast. If you'd like more Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, please head over to mollykimball.com, and you can follow me, Molly Kimball RD, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And if you haven't yet, please go to Apple Podcasts, subscribe, rate, and review this podcast, and join us next week for another dose of Fueled Wellness and Nutrition. Thanks for listening, and stay focused on living your strongest, healthiest life.